Welcome to the Global Architect Alliance with your founder, Jason Boyle. This is our 10th episode of Season 2 and is a collaboration with the Architecture Social with Stephen Drew. This is in fact our 56th discussion on Clubhouse, and please remember you can join the debates live every Thursday at 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. This is the second part of a series of helping architecture students find their first job, and we focus on how to write that killer CV. We're also joined by American architect Bill Luza. Please don't forget to subscribe, follow and share, and we would really appreciate your feedback. Enjoy.
To the Architecture Social and Global Architects Alliance special, where today we're going to talk about all that you want to talk about and all that comes to mind about CVs and resumes. So last week, me and Jason talked about a starting point. How do you tackle the search? Because often you can kind of jump into it before you know you haven't got a plan and you're running around a bit crazy. So you don't want to do that. You want to have a plan. So check out that episode if you haven't heard it yet. But to me, what's important that we talk about today is the CV. Because to me, the CV is the most important document. If it was in terms of the body, the anatomy, the CV, in my opinion, is the skeleton. It's the core. It's the crux. Or to use an architecture analogy, because this is architecture, it's the foundation. And as beautiful as that portfolio can be, the reality is that this CV is going to hold everything together. It's probably the first thing they're going to look at in terms of an employer. So today we're going to talk about some of the top tips to do, as well as the things that you should avoid. And luckily, while I've worked in recruitment, and I technically am a part two, and I've been a hiring manager, I'm also joined by someone who's been a job seeker and is a hiring manager himself. This is the fantastic Jason Boyle here, and I'm going to do a virtual round of applause for you. Here you go, Jason. Thank you for being here. Jason.
That wasn't much of an applause.
Oh, did you not hear it? There we go. It was my soundboard.
That's it. Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
Jason, tell us about yourself and why, and maybe tell us about the CVs you see in your current job at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I'm Jason Boyle. I've been an architect for 22 years now, and I work for my sins. I work in the nuclear industry, and we do get a lot of CVs in, and I mean, for me, it's sort of I've got a lot of questions for you, Stephen, but it's that clarity. I think this for our industry. You know, we want to see a well written, spelling mistake free, but it's got to grab you. It's got to, you know. So this is the whole debate I want to have to you. What do you put on your CV? Do you put anything to do with images on, or do you keep it very clean and sort of sparse? Most of the ones I get in, to be honest with you, are very, very sort of clean, and then they link to a portfolio. So yeah, I see quite a lot of CVs on a daily basis.
Well, this is it, and so it's quite well. By nature, Clubhouse is audio, right? So I can't visually go through them, but together, I think me and you can bash out a few do's and don'ts. I mean, the first thing, and you're right, I don't mind it. It's like we're like people; they can be beautiful in different shapes and forms and sizes. However, there's generally a few patterns which work, right? The first thing is, I think a CV, when you're constructing it, probably, especially if you're early in the start of your career, going to be looking at one page, maybe two at a push, right? So you want to keep it clear and concise. Generally, a CV, I don't think should go more than 2 to 3 pages. Sometimes it can go a little bit longer if you're further in your career, but you should try to keep it as clear and concise as possible. Because actually in the interview, the employer, the interviewer can kind of go into these things. But especially if you start in your career, you want to keep the CV probably 1 to 2 pages in length. The other thing, if we're going to just talk about it, so we all imagine it in our heads. If we close our eyes, you imagine what a CV is. So if we've started off by saying it's 1 to 2 pages, I mean, truthfully, I think a CV should probably be A4 in the UK. So, in the US, letter size, you don't, and it can be horizontal or it can be vertical or landscape. It's not that big a deal. It can go either way, but it needs to be concise as well as that. And if you bundle in your CV and portfolio, I advise keeping them separate. But what you don't want to do is have a CV in the PDF, which is A4 size, and then portfolio, which is A3. So you need to be very concise with it. And I think the word concise, Jason, is quite important as well, because what we don't want as well is mismatch of random stuff. So when you've got that page, we've already established now the size, which is probably going to be A4, the length, which is probably going to be 1 to 3 pages, something like that. And then you're going to do the visual language in that. So I always advise people to have a look at a font which isn't too wacky. No one wants Comic Sans, you know what I mean? We don't work in the council. I can get away with that because my mum worked in the council and all her documents were in Comic Sans. But we don't work in the council. We might have a little architecture department, but let's break the mold. You don't want any Comic Sans. And I always advise people to Google minimalistic or free fonts or graphic design clean fonts, something like that, 2021, 2022. You type the word in free, chances are on Google, you're going to find something which is really suitable. Then you have a clear font. If in doubt, you can use Helvetica. That's always a nice one. But you want a clean font. Okay, that's going to make sense. Now, as well, bit of common sense here. You don't want the text too small. You don't want the text too big. Now, nothing I'm saying here is provocative. Everything I'm saying should be quite straightforward, but you would be amazed at how it's easy to forget all this stuff when you're designing that page and you're squeezing text in. Suddenly you forget that your font is not very legible anymore. So keep a normal size font. And then the other thing is colors. Now, it sounds crazy, but it's always good to, I think, to start with a white background. You can do colored backgrounds on CVs, but just bear in mind, if it's going to be printed, it might not print really well. And you're probably asking me what dinosaurs print CVs, but you would be amazed that some companies print them out. And even then, it could be a receptionist, and him or her or they could totally get the wrong, print a colored portfolio and CV in grayscale, and you really don't want to screw it up by having something which is illegible, so the color combination is really important. So I always think that a white background is fine, and you let the words and your images speak for themselves. And maybe I'll have a little interjection here, Jason. What do you think about what I've talked about, the length, the font? Do you agree? No crazy Comic Sans and stuff like that?
Yeah, I've seen, believe it or not, I've seen some crazy fonts and colors in my time, and my personal preference is I just prefer a white background, black text, very very simple and minimal, and the font level should be readable like you would on a sort of professional document. I always go, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And you'd be amazed all the crazy things. If you are happy with me to carry on for a bit, the very subjective one, I think, is pictures. So it's kind of strange because, in one sense, on LinkedIn we all have our profile pictures, so we're not hiding stuff. And even now on Clubhouse, I can see your picture, Jason. You can see mine. But it's interesting because on CVs, the risk, on some sense, I've seen people being invited for interviews because of their pictures. Maybe they add to the charm. You think this person's engaging or whatever. But the worry I have with pictures is that you can open yourself up, if you're not careful, to unconscious biases.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
in the hire, right? Because we're not in a perfect world. And while I think the architecture industry is much more progressive than it used to be, it doesn't mean, and you've got a lot of amazing employers. Sometimes people are prejudiced. They don't even know they're being prejudiced, and unfortunately, images can do that. I think, Jason, people make assumptions before even looking at the work, and I think, if in doubt, probably leave the picture out, because you can always then link to a LinkedIn profile or a website, and maybe your picture's on there. But I think in the CV, you don't need that picture. I mean, what's your thoughts, Jason? Do you think about pictures?
Yeah. I get a mix of pictures and a mix of ones without pictures, and I think pictures personally are a absolute no. I wouldn't do it. I mean, but you know, you can, like you say. I mean, the question I was going to ask, you know, it might be a controversial one, but you know,
Go
what's the
for it.
point of it? What's the point of a CV when you've got LinkedIn?
Ooh, that's
You
very
know,
controversial.
so I again, you'll know more than me, I think, on this one. You know,
Yeah.
you can't just rock up and send an email and say there's a link there's a link to my LinkedIn profile. But I think
Yeah.
what people like yourself are doing, they're going when they're trying to find someone. I know we're sort of sending, you know, we're doing this for like architectural people trying to
Mm-hmm.
find their first job, but I think it works the other way around now, doesn't it? When recruiters they contact you through LinkedIn.
Very good question.
Yeah,
I think that the LinkedIn, in one sense, while it's a social platform and all this yada yada yada, and I think LinkedIn is powerful. Actually, LinkedIn, there's a hidden function there where you can export your profile as a CV. So it's where you're going is it makes sense what you're on about. Now, if you think about it in an abstract sense, the further you are in your career, the chances are the less you're going to be polishing your CV, because all of your experience that you've done is basically your CV. So, for example, Jason, you had, if I remember correctly, talking about an article on mission critical in the RABA and all that stuff, and journal, which is cool, right? But stuff like that in the future, that's kind of like you being out there. Now, if you were anything like me, Jason, when you were starting, when I started, I had no experience, right? So you've got to kind of construct that CV to get going. And as
yeah,
well, now you've got all those connections, which are awesome. But I think about the amount of time, mate, that's gone into that. And I think the way I would think about it is the CV in the traditional sense we need to do now, but in the future, the more and more you put out there, the point is, like you're saying, Jason, opportunities come to you. So in the future, everyone here listening to this, I think more opportunities are going to come to yourself. But if you maybe in the start of your career, that CV is kind of important, because unfortunately, we're the architecture industry hasn't quite progressed to that level that you're on about, my friend, where people have just been approached on LinkedIn. I think in a recruitment sense, where I'm paid for my time to find people in that role, of course I'll approach people on LinkedIn. I'm not even worried about looking at a CV. The CV's to give to the architecture practice. But if you're submitting your CV, if you're applying for a role to an architecture company, they'll expect a PDF. And I think that's the other interesting bit we can talk about on CVs, because I see QR codes and they're kind of cool. And I really think that QR codes, Jason, you're kind of bridging that world you're talking about with like a LinkedIn profile or a website and the old PDF format. But unfortunately, with these QR codes, most of the companies that I work with, they don't even click them half the time. And I think,
oh,
yeah, well, maybe they do,
I
maybe
see.
they don't, and that's the risk. And the problem is, imagine if they're reviewing 5 CVs for the job, and some of the best work or interesting information is on a QR code, and the hiring manager hasn't got their phone, or they're reviewing them on the phone, and they can't click on the QR code because it's on the phone. Then the chances you might lose that stuff. So the way I would advise is, if you kind of get the basics of the CV right, then you can add all the cool, awesome tidbits on top. So that's my kind of thoughts on it. But what do you think about that then, Jason? What I was saying about when you're starting, you kind of got to get the CV out there to get opportunities. You've got to kind of hunt them rather than in the future being the one that's being chased, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely makes sense. And I think if you're starting out in your career, it's, I struggled with this about what do I put down as my work experience when you've just finished your degree. Um, you know, I struggled with what to put down, and then I struggled so much. I'll tell you this one for a fact. I wrapped my CV, which was printed off. I mean, this is going back 22 years ago, or more, in a beer can, and I sent it to practices. So they had like a can of beer with my CV wrapped around it, and it didn't work.
Well,
So
let me.
I
I was drinking a water then. It would have been funny if it was a beer, and I would have told you, but I can't. Well, how did it go down the beer? I mean, it could have gone either way, right? People open the
well,
beer.
they actually wrote back to me and thanked me for the beer, but they just said, we don't currently don't have any projects, and we want someone with experience, and that is the problem, isn't it, with finding that first job. It's really critical about what you do put on your CV.
My
And
goodness. If I had a beer attached to every CV I go to in recruitment, I would have to have a lot more tolerance than I do now. Woof. But I think that's a heck of a way to get noticed. And I think that's smart. But what's interesting apart from you as a poor student going down to Tesco buying 6-pack of Fosters and losing them left, right, center, because architecture is tough. But what I like about that is that the CV's got to stand for itself, but then the kind of the gimmick of the beer, it gets you noticed. But the truth is, you can get noticed. But if the CV isn't good, Jason, or it's very competitive, so I'm not saying your CV
maybe
wasn't.
my CV wasn't very good.
Okay, but all the beers in the world, if your CV's not good, my friend, doesn't get you very far, is it? And someone made me laugh with talking about the other day, asking, "Oh, do I really need to do a CV if I can just go outside the architecture practice and play a song or hold the sign up?" And I was thinking, that's like shows a bit of effort, but it's also, on the other hand, extremely unimaginative. As in, I don't need to do a CV. I'll just go outside Jason's office and camp there for 6 hours. I reckon you'd be like, I really appreciate your effort, but A, you should go home. B, do you have your CV on you? And C, do you know Revit? Right? Do you get it? Because the job
Yeah, I do.
the job requirement's still the same, no matter if you camp out, and that's why I think we're talking about this. Is it's all the tricks and tips that I've learned on CVs. Now, you don't have to follow everything I do like gospel. That you can. There's lots of things that I talk about that people do that still get awesome jobs. However, all the stuff I'm talking about today, getting the font right, having the length of the document not too long, you would be amazed how many times I see, especially in the role of recruitment, where these little things stop the person getting an interview. And on that note, I've got another
Yeah,
one here, if I can tell you, Jason,
go
right?
for it.
The number one bugbear I see by clients is spelling mistakes. Some people can't get past it.
Yes.
I mean, what's your thoughts on it? I'm quite forgiving, but I've some people. It's attention to detail, right? And you work in nuclear, so if is it like Homer
Yeah.
Simpson? You drop something, it blows up. You know.
Well, yeah, it is. It's an absolute massive bugbear of mine. And if I
Mm.
see a spelling mistake, it's like I just can't go any further. I'm sorry.
You can't get past
Um,
it.
I
Ooh, see?
can't because I can't because I think it just for me it shows that you haven't given due care and attention, and this is the first, this is the first experience of
Mm,
that person sending it in. So I would definitely recommend getting someone else to proofread it, putting it through a spell check.
yeah.
There's all sorts of there's no excuse for me. with a spelling mistake.
Oh, if my
Sorry.
soundboard was working, I would do the hammer, but we'll do the bell for now. I get it. I get it. I think that for me, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but it's an indicator. It's a red flag, like you said, Jason, isn't it? I mean, it means that either the person was rushing the document, or more likely, the most spelling mistakes come from is when the person's designing the document, and I've done it myself. You know, when you're designing that document, what you said was a good suggestion is by giving it to someone else to look at, they pick up the things you don't see, because when you're designing a document, your brain does this weird thing where you skim the words and it's wrong, but you in your head you read it the correct way because you're in that design mode where you're designing the sentence, but you're not paying attention to the words there. So you have to spell check and give it to someone that that maybe doesn't know architecture, because they'll be like, "What the heck? What does that mean?" And you're like, "Oh, typo." So I think that's a big, big, important one. Should I tell you my bugbear before we have a little interlude?
Yeah, before we got to Bill, yeah, go for it.
Well, thank you, Bill. You've been patiently there. My bugbear, right, and is when I get a CV file that basically it will be like new CV 2021 version 2. I'm like, I don't even know who that is. You know, when you've got like 3 of these on your on your computer,
Yeah, I know.
you don't even know where they are. And I know this because when I worked at Accra Larry in the house in architecture practice, trying to process all the CVs that came in, I would just lose people sometimes. So you have to put your Jason Boyle CV.pdf, Stephen Drew CV.pdf. So I'm glad I got that off my chest. Bill, welcome so much to the stage. So good to have you here. How are you doing?
Hey guys, good to be here with you all today and
Nice to
talking
see
about
you.
this. Yeah, haven't been around for a while, but just been nose to the grindstone. Um, but yeah, good topic, and I've been in and out listening and had some calls in between. But a couple of key things that when you guys were talking about it, I thought about is, and especially these days with the global job market, like I know years ago with my when my studio was based in Washington D.C. and I had put to hire some interns, and I was blown away that I had applicants from all over the world, and you know, you have one little position and you get 500 applicants, and they're from all over the world. And one key thing was that, you know, depending where you're applying for, and like when you guys were discussing it and saying the paper size, if it's A4 or whatever it is, and then that's the thing of okay, so where are you applying for this job, and is it A4? Is it 8.5 by 11? You know, is it because of you might be based in a different country and you're applying for a job somewhere else, or you originally were from another country, so you're used to a certain standard. So that's a key thing, because you know, employer gets the resume if it's a PDF or if it's a hard copy or whatever, and it's an odd size to them. And, you know, in a way, they're like, what am I going to do with this? Because it's, you know, you think gone are the days of physical files, but when they do interview, they are going to have a physical copy, and then they are going to have it somewhere. So little things like that. And then when you guys were talking about how many pages, um, in the US, it's always been a hardcore one page. We don't care how many years of experience you have, if you're fresh out of school, if you're, you know, 20, 30 years in the field, put it in one page. And you know, nobody ever says, can it be a double-sided one page? You know, they just say one page. And so it's a key thing that if it went to 2 or 3 pages, it, I guess it's this sort of thought in their mind that you couldn't condense it. You couldn't be, uh, you know, fine tuned. You couldn't design your resume. And so for me, at my point in my career, I remember times when I was having to submit a CV because you have a project that requires that as part of the from the client or something like that, and thinking, how am I going to get myself into one page? and you just get creative about it. You get creative about using the margins, and how you fit things on the page. Um, so a lot of little tidbits like that, and then that was hilarious, Jason, about your beer stunt. Um,
Thanks.
I thought you better research what they like to drink on their beer 30, because if you give them something that they think is piss, then there you go, um,
It
but
definitely wasn't Foster's. It definitely wasn't Foster's, Stephen.
yeah, and but like that is a thing though, that for me, like, say when you get 500 CVs, and be it that they're coming in the mail or they're coming an email with a PDF, and however you do it, when you're scanning those things, like for me, I do a first round where I am just looking at them a few seconds, and I'm marking them A, B, or C, and they're going into folders of just saying, because you have 500, you got to get it down to maybe 100, then you got to get it down to 20, and then maybe 5, because you're not going to interview more than a few people for the position. And so in a few seconds, you open their resume, you look at it, you scan it, like you guys were saying, absolutely don't want a glaring typo. You're looking at how they formatted it, because they are in architecture and they should be knowing how to compose a page. And that's one thing, is that over the years I've seen that in architectural schooling and training, they really should have students take some sort of graphic design or typesetting or some course like that, interdisciplinary, because architects are just notoriously bad about presenting themselves. And so you scan it, and you're just going on what catches your eye, and do they have a cover letter? Another key thing, depending on which country you're applying in, but in the US, is it's always been a standard that you have to have a cover letter. And is the cover letter a second page? How does it lead you in? If you're emailing it, can you have the email be your cover letter? What's the proper thing? And that's always a tough one, because you say, well, they're reading an email, but then these might be printed out, given, an HR person might be sitting at a table reviewing these. So you do want a cover letter, short and sweet. And if I open a file from an applicant and I see that the cover letter in the first sentence looks like it's cut and paste, then they just go in the C or D file. I'm not, no thanks.
Yes, I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. And so it really is that first couple of seconds. I guess that's the whole thing I'm saying, is you open it up, you all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, that's an odd paper size. First impression, odd. Okay, is it something that impressed you, or is it something that is just complicating your day? The cover letter, is it a cut and paste, or does it appear like that they're actually applying for your job? um it's amazing how many you'll see that they actually made a mistake because they were copy paste, and somewhere in the body it says something about a different firm, and you go, oh come on, really? And so, like you guys were mentioning, it's always good to have a buddy like proofread if you can, because we'll miss those things in the thick of it. But yeah. But that's some of my key points.
Now a word from our sponsor. PPL is a global health technology provider which specializes in the eradication of bacteria, viruses, and pathogen risks using a range of germicidal UVC devices. Tried and tested and proven for 80 plus years in industries and environments that otherwise can present a serious risk to human health and safety, such as in operating theatres, laboratories, biosciences, meat production facilities. PPL are the only UVC health technology provider on the British government's coronavirus COVID-19 response list of key suppliers and are catalogued by the CCS under medical services. You can find more about PPL biosafety at www.ppl-biosafety.com.
Thanks, Bill. That's amazing. I agree that, and I've learned the hard way, is if you're going to customize something, do it at the top and the bottom, because it definitely, if you customize something in the middle, chances are on the next one you do it, you're going to miss it. And I think you're right. I think it's nothing more of a turn off than reading another architecture practice. I have a friend actually that sent out CVs and portfolios to several architecture practices, and for some reason did them all at once, which I think is never a good idea. You should do them separately, right? But what they did as well, Bill and Jason, is instead of putting it in BCC, put it in CC, so all the other practices could see the other practices. And then what's even worse is
Oh my
What?
God.
yeah,
Oh
and
my
what's
gosh.
even worse is that my friend forgot that the list that he used from before was from the year when he looked for his job. So his
Oh
current
my.
employer was in it, and he sent his CV to his current employer.
Oh God.
they,
Did
they
he
pulled
lose his job?
yeah, they said, well, you're looking, we'll give you 4 weeks. So that's the I shouldn't laugh so much, but he's a good friend and he won't mind me saying it's a good sense of humor. That's the most car crash one I've ever heard. And you're right. I think the danger is when you think of things like a factory, these things can get overlooked. And I always think that it's fine to have a core set of this is in the covering letter, this is in the CV. But you're right. It's worth customizing it a bit more for the companies you really want to work at. But then don't beat yourself up too much if you just change things a little bit for the companies. Maybe you're not aware yet. And it depends what stage you're in your career. I think if you're at the start of your career, right, you can just customize it a bit for lots of applications because you're getting in the industry. But when you're further in your career, the reality is you're probably not going to be sending your CV out to more than a handful of places, 2, 3, 4, 5, when you're a senior architect, because you're just further in your career. I mean, what's your thoughts, Jason? You enjoy my friend's story then?
Yeah, I did, and that's hilarious. And you'll have to let me know after this who that was.
No chance.
But no chance. Yeah, no. I think what I really want to know, and there's two things I've been thinking of while Bill was talking. Was you have this time scale of like a few seconds. I think I know quite a few associate partners at Foster and Partners, and they say they give each CV 5 to 10 seconds. And so it's like, I think what people, listening back to this would want to know is like what makes that CV stand out. And I understand it's a very, very tricky thing to kind of explain. So that there's that, and then and I know there's like a sweet spot in terms of web advertising where you sort of, I think it's the top right corner where people kind of focus on, and that's the most expensive advertising part. So there's that question, and then the other one is like I really want to know like what are the no-nos about what you shouldn't put on your CV. Like, should you put your hobbies on, or should you put I don't know. Some people put their date of birth on, which I wouldn't think you should do that now. But what? So they're two questions. I'd be interested, Stephen and Bill, what you think about them.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in, and then Bill, you let me know your thoughts. But Bill said something which I resonated towards. Is when you open the CV, is the CV? Are you fighting the CV or are you not? And so I think, Jason, if you're fighting to read that CV for whatever reason, it's becoming difficult. The reality is you're going to tune out quicker. And I think you're right. So in recruitment world, I will look at the CV, and in 5 seconds, I got a first impression. And if that first impression is decent, then I give it another 5 to 10 seconds. And then if that impression goes well, I don't pick up any spellings, and then I zoom in and I kind of start peeling the layers back. And that really, really helps. And that really, really, basically you keep buying time, but it's that first impression that really does matter. The other tip I was going to add quickly is I always look at the graph. Top tip is if there's a practice in particular that you really like to look at, chances are they might have design and access statements in the public realm, Jason. So you can quickly look at the graphic design of the documents they make. it's not a bad idea, kind of
Yeah, yeah.
emulating little styles, but injecting your own. That could work quite well. So there's a variety of things. I mean, Bill, if you're here, feel free to jump in on any thoughts you have on that. Otherwise, I can keep on going.
Yeah, one thing that in line with that on the page that before you guys mentioned about vertical, horizontal, and you know, in that sense of like when you first glance, depending on, you know, I guess in business things are usually vertically uh, set, and the idea if it's horizontal and landscape, then it should quickly read like so the person isn't like flopping the page around or saying, "Oh, it's sideways." You know what I mean? And and then I think as far as like what I was saying about condensing to one page or trying to. One thing I found is the idea of, you know, how when you have references, and they'll put references available upon request, or sometimes they'll require you to put a reference, and you don't want to give people your reference information before you know if they're even considering you. That's one like tug of war with CVs, resumes that I've experienced from both sides. And so when I was submitting resumes to stuff, CVs, that what I would do is I would incorporate one or two or three real brief quotes from either a client or somebody in the industry, the trade, you know, about me, and it was in a smaller font within the page, typeset within the page, and I found that went over really well, because it's sort of like when you're reading an article in a magazine, and it will have that quote or something in a smaller font, like set it into the article, and it sort of just gives a bullet point of interest. So that's another key point for me.
I think that's a good. I've never
That's a
actually
good
seen
one.
that
A
with
good one.
the quotes, but I think that's amazing. I quite like it because yeah, it's like a Google review or a LinkedIn recommendation. It carries a lot of weight. I think when you were talking about all that, there was a few things that were coming into my head. I think that the other bit that is important and open to interpretation, you mentioned the references when there's always that ambiguous thing, but also I think software is incredibly hard to kind of simulate in the CV, and I always find that people can go either way. So I think it's always difficult to say, okay, I know AutoCAD, I know Revit. Okay, you can just say the words, fine. And then I kind of try to deduct how much you know that by all your experience on the CV. But then the other bit I find interesting is how do you illustrate if you've done it a lot? And I always say to people, put the length of time that you've used the software for. That generally works quite well, because excellent in AutoCAD is extremely open to interpretation. And I've seen BIM managers who define themselves as moderate at Revit. And I've heard people that are whiz and you give them a test and they're excellent in Revit and suddenly they score 30%, right? So software is really open to interpretation. And the other bit that I find maddening is there's like this bright idea of saying, oh well, you know what, I'm not going to say the names of the software, I'm going to put the logos of the software on them and not even have the text sometimes. And
Oh
so
no,
yeah, and
no.
little old me, I kind of know the R is for the Revit, right? But I'm guessing the grasshopper would be the grasshopper. But when you've got stuff like Lumien's logo, which is a blue tree and stuff, I know that now, but chances are not many people know it. And I think it's what, like Bill was saying, you're making it difficult for the reader to understand. So I think, while a nice idea in essence, it's bad execution, and I think you shouldn't do that. Have you seen logos and stuff like that on CVs, Jason, or anything that in your head you've seen people do and you thought, oh my goodness, that's a bad idea?
Yeah, I haven't seen the logos on, but I definitely do want to come back to the first thing you said about software skills, and people, and this open to interpretation. Because I mean, for where I work, it's like it's essential. So you have to be able to use, we use Autodesk's Revit, and I need someone to be able to use that, you know, to a very high degree, because of the projects that we're working on, and then people will actually not be truthful with that, and they get found out so quickly. And obviously, you've got to understand is there's a with most employees, most employers, they'll have a sort of time period where you're on a probationary period. So for me, it's always best to be as truthful as possible. I know it's very, very hard because you're trying to sell yourself, but you will. I think it's best to be open and honest and say, I haven't got this great level of experience, but I'm willing to maybe work some extra hours in my own time, just to upskill, and that's maybe a controversial thing these days, but some architects will offer training, and I think that's great as well. And I think that should happen. The worst thing I've seen, and I think it's worth pointing out at this stage, is people actually lying whether they're an architect or not. And we've had that.
Ooh.
I've had that in my company, and I just simply, as soon as I get someone I'm interested in, I type their name into Architects Registration Board in the UK, and I can see whether they're an architect or not. And if their CV comes in and they have claimed that they're an architect and they're not on the register, I'll go and report them straight away.
Oh, I'm amazed that happens. That's mad. I saw once.
Oh, it does happen. It does.
There was only one time I saw that when I was working at EPR Architects, where there was a contractor who came in, and after 2 or 3 weeks, um, he wasn't an architect. It was like probably this guy going around just conning everyone in this elaborate scheme, and you're thinking like, who does that? Never even went to like architecture university, just completely made it up. And of course, when they found out that was the end, it was out the door, with the chap straight away removed from the premises. But yeah, lying on CVs. Let's talk. Let me expand upon one.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Well, maybe it's a different subject for a different day, but I'd be interested from you, Stephen and Bill, before you go on, about what's the worst lies you've seen. Anyway, carry on.
Ooh, worst lies. I was going to say though, and maybe that would be a good one for another day, especially if we all have a beer here or whatever. But what I was going to say is, everyone worries about gaps in their CV sometimes, and I had a really good friend, not an architect, but the principal, still applies, and he went for 2 years motorcycling. Massive gap, right? But on his CV, when he updated it, he said, for 2 years, I was a motorcyclist who crossed Europe, and then he listed all the countries he'd been. And instead of kind of feeling sheepish about it, just, basically held it up, had to hire to everyone, and said, this is where I've been for 2 years. I can't pretend I was working. I was enjoying Europe. I worked for 5 years before I saved up and had a really good time. And actually, that went over as a conversation piece in the interview. And I think that gaps in your CV are absolutely fine, especially any like mothers here which have had a family. You have to be pulled away from architecture, and I think architecture is going in the right direction. But I've seen people struggle with that before, or almost embarrassed for having a family, and it's a shame that they felt that way. But it's completely normal for these certain incidents to happen, or life occasions which should be celebrated. So whether you're traveling or if you've had a personal emergency or anything, you can bring it up and you can talk about a gap. Obviously, if you've got gaps every 6 or 7 months, Jason, you're kind of taking 3-4 months off, there might be a pattern there which someone will want to talk about, right? But I think that 1 or 2 years or going traveling is something that you can add, and maybe that could even go into activities. And one thing I was going to say, the last bit I was going to say here before, Jason, you can open the room out, or we can change the conversation, whatever you want. Is you mentioned activities at the end, or hobbies. Now, I think, say now you're doing an architecture podcast, or you run in a clubhouse room, because we're on Clubhouse. Great, put it on, talk about what you're doing. But I always laugh when people put in hobbies like music and movies, because it's like, well, no shit, I love movies and music, but that shouldn't make it to the CV, right? So try to think about something which is a little bit more intrinsic with the industry, so it can be
Yes.
it can be creative, kind of. It can be like, or it can be philanthropy, or it can be fundraising, it can be helping people out. You can get involved in a lot of charities, good causes. They don't even need to be architectural. It can be like your local community, or like chess club is interesting, or say now you like martial arts, cool, put it down. If you're jiu-jitsu, great. Or anything like that. Maybe you're a DJ or a VJ in, or whatever, whack that in. But when it comes to stuff like, I enjoy classical music and watching Amazon Prime, that's not good enough. It's like, you've got to think about what is there. And if you don't have anything, it's nothing to get embarrassed about. Because I remember when I did my first CV, I was like, oh gosh, what can I put in there? I work in Waitrose. What can I put on there? But you can start building it up. So if anyone's here going, oh my goodness, I've just been on Spotify and Netflix. Well, don't worry about it. I've done it too. But you've got to start getting those things and getting involved. And the more you get involved in this stuff, so say now you're interested in parametric design. If you go to like local meetups, you could make some friends where you have common interest and you love parametric design and all that stuff, but you can get noticed for that, and in time jobs come to you. So get out there and do stuff and get involved, and generally nothing negative comes out of it, and you grow as character, as a person. And when I kind of see lots of this stuff on your CV, people's involved in an architectural charity, or they love their artwork and they've got their own website. It's really interesting, and you click there and you can go there. And I think it really builds up character, and it kind of paints that picture on the CV of the person that's going to be operating the Revit and the BIM, the person that you want to be in the office next to and you're going to spend a lot of time with. So I thought I'd end my point on that, Jason, and it's up to you then if you've got any more questions, or you want to open the room up or have a chat with Bill, really.
Well, yeah, I think what you've said makes a lot of sense. I think the CV is a great sort of starting point, and it's got to really serve that purpose of getting that interview, doesn't it? That's what you're sending it in for. And Bill was saying, writing that. I believe in writing a cover letter, as we call it in the UK. So you keep it again to one page, because that's a bit of a narrative about who you are and why you want this position. Never cut and paste. You've got to adapt each one. That's where you put the legwork. Your CV obviously can be tweaked to certain companies, but it's generally your sort of letter. Your letter to that practice should be very, very specific, and tailored to that practice. It's there was a few things I was going to mention, but I think we've covered most of the sort of salient points here. Um, I guess what people probably want to know, Bill, is there anything you want to add before?
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
go for
just
it.
chime in that the point on the gap in resume CVs, everything in life is how you spin it and how you package it. So, and the concern about a gap in your, if you had a year or two that you're out of architectural practice, um, that's called a sabbatical, and then it's a research sabbatical, and because whatever you were doing for that time period, it still affects who you are and your knowledge base, and so it's how you package it. So if you were off a year traveling or doing something else, and it might be considered frivolous, then or privileged, or it was a sabbatical, and then when it's viewed in those eyes, it's it's completely a different scenario, because it's viewed as something that enriches the person or their knowledge. I had one back in the day that, I was traveling. And so for me, it was, and because my work focuses on food and shelter, so housing and hospitality and food and beverage architecture. And so in mine, it said, a traveling sabbatical with research on, food and shelter in this, these regions or countries, yada, yada. And it went over so well. And another thing I'll mention is that little things that are just little nuggets from your, your college days or your younger days that it's just to see like which ones will catch somebody's eye. Like for instance, me, something that when I was a kid, you're as a child, you're a young boy and you were a Cub Scout, a Weeblo, a Boy Scout, and the highest ranking in Boy Scouts is an Eagle Scout. And so it's just one bullet point on my resume, Eagle Scout. And it blew me away that I would get a call and all the person would ask is, okay, so you went to this university? Yes. You're an Eagle Scout? Yes. Can you come in on Monday? And so certain things that, certain accolades or achievements like that, you just put it in a bullet point in there and it will register, or the person seeing that resume will relate to it. Maybe they went through the same uh, regiment and they can relate to it, or they just have heard of it. And that just happened to be one of the ones that garners a ton of respect, and they see it as that you're disciplined, so that's another key one.
That's a good point, isn't it? That sort of discipline of being a scout when you were younger. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I think I was just going to add as well, if you're a student and this is your first job, because we are trying to help because people in the UK and I think probably also around the world are graduating this summer. Is including like if you're a student rep or you've joined the society, like a local architect society, and being involved with any of them activities, because I'm part of the Manchester Society of Architects, which is the biggest, or one of the oldest societies of architects in the world. And, being part of that as a student member looks great on your CV. And you've already gotten to know most of the architects in the sort of area where that society is. That can be a great advantage and looks good on your CV. So that I just wanted to add that one in, Stephen and Bill.
Excellent. I think it's great. And look, another, I know all these thoughts are coming in at the last minute, Jason, but in terms of role and responsibility as well, when you get more experience in the future, that I think as Bill said at the start, you don't want to waffle on. And I think in the CV, as again, as Bill said, is about being literal, it's about being factual. And yes, you can talk about your aspirations, but in terms of your role and responsibilities, and again, what we talk about when we talked about a bit earlier, Jason, was software, you need to be somewhat factual. So I always advise people, say now on their first or second job, once you've done that under the belt, you need to paint the picture of the type of projects that you've worked on, residential, large scale, based in London, based in, I don't know, New York, wherever. You're going to be very literal. And in the UK, you would talk about the RIBA stages. Was it in design? Was it in construction? What your role and responsibilities are. And you'd be amazed that sometimes I think people don't paint the picture really well. They don't really even say what sectors sometimes the projects were on. And it's all about visualizing. And I think actually being on Clubhouse is a really good example of that, because these the portfolio is going to have the beautiful pictures that are going to visualize the projects, and people will get a sense of depth and scale. But at the same time, especially in development, there's no portfolios. Architects that go then to developers, there is no portfolios, and that CV has to paint a picture, and therefore you have to illustrate to the reader the size of the projects, your role, your responsibilities, and the problem is if you're waffling or you don't give any detail, you lose that imagination of the reader who can then visualize it, because that's what it's all about. As you said, Jason, the name of the game of the CV is to get an interview, right? And then in the interview, it's for you to convey in the room to get that you are the right person for the job. Chances are someone's invited you for an interview. They think you probably should be all right for the role, and that they want to give up an hour of their time to see you. And I think that the chances are, if you're vague or if you waffle on in the descriptions, then if the imagination's not going, then that person can't match it to their current situation, because that really is what an interview is. You need someone who can work on your team if you're hiring, that you believe is the right person to do the role that you need on your team. And if you can visualize that you've worked on large buildings, and if I'm hiring for someone to manage a large building, when I read that, I think, oh, okay, this person, she's going to be amazing, or potentially could be an awesome fit. We'll invite them in. So I think it really helps to be literal and visual about role and responsibilities. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that point, or we can Scooby-Dooby on. Jason, do we need to put nuclear buildings for you to get hired by you, or are you quite open to mixed use and commercial?
Yeah, I mean, there's again that we have that issue of, like, people probably say, oh, well, how do I get into nuclear when I've got no nuclear experience? But we would look for problem solving skills, so behavioral qualities as well. But also, if you've designed buildings, maybe large industrial or pharmaceutical or hospital projects, that would be their transferable skills. So you could make that very clear, that in your cover letter to say, well, I haven't worked on nuclear projects, but I've got a real interest in keen interest in learning about how to design nuclear facilities. But I have got these transferable skills from other industries, and that comes across really well for me. And we took on, I think, three or four people with them transferable skills with no nuclear experience, and so it does work.
There you go, because the person illustrated things that you could relate to and those skills you loved. So, I mean, thanks for illustrating that. Now, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and CVs and like everything is some of these things that it's hard to summarize within an hour. But I really appreciate, Jason, the points that you've raised then. And Bill, I really appreciate you coming to the stage as well and sharing your thoughts. So, Bill, just before we kind of wind down the room and everything, where can people want to kind of pick your brains on this or want to get in touch with other things? Where do we find you, Bill, online at the moment?
Yeah, on my profile, it's got all my info, and I always tell people that since I guess in an informal sense, since it's coming from Clubhouse, that if they ping me on Instagram, then it's I know that it's where they're coming from, and as opposed to just emailing and it gets into the middle of everything else. So Instagram, just ping me on a DM on Instagram, and or even on here. It's great now that you can message on here, and I check those very frequently. So either way, that's a great way to reach out to me. And if it was a student that's preparing stuff, or or anybody that has any interest in architecture or anything creative, then I'm always interested.
Amazing. You're absolute gentleman. Thank you, Bill Luza. You've been an absolute star. My soundboard doesn't work, but I'll give a real round of applause for that. And Jason, I really appreciate you being here as well. So, Jason, can you tell us where people can find you and what you've got going on with the Global Architects Alliance over the next few weeks?
Yeah, you can contact me on my website, globalarchitectalliance.com, or LinkedIn, and again on Clubhouse. And I think we're all on Twitter and Instagram, and that them sort of links are on my Clubhouse profile. So yeah, it's I want to know what we're talking about next week.
Well, I think as we talk about CVs, I think we'll attempt, and I'm not sure we can do this in an hour, but we'll attempt, if it's cool with you, Jason, to talk about the portfolio. I was thinking, which is
Yes.
the sidekick of the CV, right? If the I think if the if the in the analogy of the building, if the CV is kind of the foundation, then the portfolio is everything around it, right? Because the portfolio, and there's two portfolios in my head. There's the portfolio that you send with your application, the shorter one, the kind of the best hits. And then there's the portfolio in person. Maybe even, Jason, we split that down and we talk about, first of all, the portfolio that you send with the CV, and then the differences in the portfolio in an interview, because I think that they're similar but very different objectives, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you might
Absolutely.
even touch on the idea of, I guess backing up to the portfolio that you applied to your educational program, and then how that rolls forward into your first job application portfolio. And because that's one thing that I think architects, people in the architecture field, drop the ball on is and I'm guilty as anyone, is just carrying your portfolio along with your experience through the years of updating it every few years. And same way, like these days, like I laugh at myself and say my website was done in, I don't know, maybe 2006, and it hasn't been updated. And because you get to a point in your career where you don't need to update it, but you do need to update it. So portfolio, I think it's like from when you applied to schools to when you're getting your first jobs, and then even when you're in the profession of updating it.
Very good point. I think that's definite food for thought. So I like that. Jason, we've got our thinking to do, as Bill's put a good ratchet in the works there of how
He
we can a
has.
fresh spin on it, because you're right. So just say, let's talk about portfolios in an hour can be tricky. So we will do that. But so thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. And Jason, really appreciate you collaborating with me on this. We will be back next week on the Wednesday. It was meant to be a Wednesday, but I picked the
It
wrong
was.
day. And Jason's luckily knows me enough that he knows what I'm like. It's not intentional. I'm just crazily, manically running around. But I'll calm myself down. We will schedule it for Wednesday at 7:00 next week in the UK. So that is British Standard Time. So we will get that schedule. We will talk about the portfolios. And I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you all. And I think we'll close the room now. Thank you again, Bill, for joining me. And thank you, Jason. Have a good evening, everyone. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Take
Pleasure
care.
being with you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye now. Thank you for listening. Please support the Global Architect Alliance by subscribing and sharing this podcast. Please also leave a rating. For more information of what the Global Architect Alliance does, please visit globalarchitectalliance.com. We will see you next time.